Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to my presentation today. My name is Patrick Johnson. I'm the head of discovery at the UK-based indie publisher Playstack, and today I'm going to be talking about From Discovery to Signing Balatro. So just to give a little bit of a brief introduction before the formal introduction, hopefully this presentation is going to be useful for everyone in the audience. What I'm going to be covering is what publishers look for in particular projects before we sign them. And once I cover that, I'm going to use Balatro as a specific case study. So I'm going to go in depth on what the signing process was like for that game, how I found the game, how the negotiations went, and how we ended up signing it. So hopefully that's useful. I know a lot of people in the audience, people at this event might be students or first-time devs. I know a lot of professional developers as well. So hopefully it's useful kind of everyone from all different walks of life. Let me just go on to the next slide. This is the team at Playstack. So like I mentioned, we're a UK-based indie publisher. If we could have the next slide, please. We're a London-based team, but we are international. So I myself am based in Tokyo and cover the Asian region, but we do have people based all over the world. So there's people based in the UK, mostly remote hybrid, but we also have team members based in Canada and North America as well. If we could have the next slide, please. So we have 10 years of experience across both mobile and PC console. So interestingly enough, Playstack actually first started as a free-to-play mobile publisher. That all changed in 2019 when we published a game called Mortal Shell, and now we focus primarily on premium PC and console experiences, but we also still have a little bit of expertise in mobile as well, which is helpful for things like Apple Arcade deals when we brought Balatro to mobile. Can we have the next slide, please? So we have proven success across multiple genre spaces. One of the things about Playstack is we are genre agnostic in terms of the games that we try to sign. So we have worked on deck building roguelikes, Souls-likes, Metroidvanias. We have quite a wide and varied portfolio, and I think that's reflective of the taste of the team and the reflective of us as enthusiasts within Playstack. Could I have the next slide, please? So we have an ethos based around publishing a smaller number of higher quality games. So we don't pick up lots and lots of titles. We really aim to publish between 4 or 5 games per year. I look to sign between 9 to 10 games per year since I'm filling out the future portfolio as well. But we are looking at a smaller number of games. Can I have the next slide, please? And of course, we're focused on long-lasting developer relationships. I think all publishers try and do this, but we do allow for full creative control with the developers that we work with. We are there to be a partner. We are there to play builds and give feedback and do all of those things, but we trust the developers that we work with to make the game that they're making, and we don't take any sort of kind of control over the creative process during that. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself here. If we could go on to the next slide. And one more, please. So my name is Patrick Johnson, as I mentioned. I'm the head of discovery at Playstack. I always feel very strange when I'm talking about myself when you can see me and there's a picture of me on screen, but that's just the way the kind of presentation has panned out. Head of discovery is a fancy title, but really I'm just the head of scouting at Playstack. So what I do is I assess the games at the early point, I take pitch meetings, I go to events like these and talk to developers, and I do the financial and competitor analysis as well when it comes to eventually signing the project. Go to the next slide, please. I have 6 years industry experience, so before I joined Playstack in a business development capacity, I was a freelance journalist. That's where I got my start. So I worked for some British magazines like Retro Gamer and Edge, writing freelance articles for them, but then moved to the business development side at Playstack. Can I have the next slide, please? When I first started Playstack, they gave me a nice amount of time to kind of build the discovery process. So it took a full year before I actually signed any projects at Playstack. But what I was doing during that time was being the only person on the discovery team at that point, was building the process, trying to figure out the ethos of the company, what we'd be doing, and what kind of games we'd end up signing. Have the next slide, please. And I should mention as well, sorry, before I go on, that when I first joined Playstack, I was wearing many hats. So not only was I doing discovery, but I also did things like early English localization for Case of the Golden Idol, and I also helped playtest the Entropy Center as well, which were 2 titles that launched closely after I joined the company. So once I had a time to build the discovery process and kind of work on that, I did get to sign my first projects, and the projects I've signed since joining Playstack have been games like Balatro, Abe Arctic Factor, Lorne Vale, Unbeatable Darkwater, the most recently released Recoin as well, and a lot of unannounced titles as well. So I've been lucky enough to sign about 12 to 13 projects over my 4 years at Playstack. Can I have the next slide, please? And I'm the designated Jimbo carrier as well. So that awful creature I take to events with me is, thank you, a round of, wow, thank you, that's very kind. Yeah, that is a disease-riddled plushie at this point. He's been to a lot of places, so he's in a cabinet somewhere right now. If we could have the next slide, please. So what's the point of this presentation? Yes, that picture is kind of reflective of how I was feeling when I first wrote this talk. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be kind of talking about the entire discovery process. So how I first started, how I found Balatro, what were kind of the thought processes behind that, what the forecasting was like, what the expectations were like internally at Playstack. And before I get onto that, though, I am going to talk more generally about what publishers look for when they're signing projects, obviously with the caveat that that's from specifically a Playstack perspective, but hopefully the things I'm talking about will kind of be general advice for maybe first-time developers or developers currently pitching projects at the moment. If we could have the next slide, please. So yeah, I'm going to start by talking about what we look for and how we look for it. So I'm going to talk about the processes behind the discovery process, but I'm also going to talk about what games kind of we specifically look for in specific genre spaces. Could I have the next slide, please? What do publishers generally want to see? So I'll try and cover a little bit about what you should be coming to with a publisher, what you should have prepared, what are the kind of things you should be thinking about going into those early conversations. If we could have the next slide, please. So like I mentioned, I'm also going to talk about forecasting and predicting success. What you're really going to see is how wrong we were about Balatro in lots of different ways. How wrong some of our internal feedback was, how wrong some of our internal forecasting was. But hopefully the takeaway from this presentation is it's okay for publishers to be wrong if they're wrong in the right ways. So that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And if we could have the next slide, please. And pretty much summing up, what does this entire process look like from start to finish? So if we could go on to the next slide. So our aim at Playstack and the aim of the discovery team is to see every new game. So that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but basically the idea is that we have tools that we've built internally at Playstack that help that process. My job still to this day, even as head of the discovery team from when I first started, is I wake up every morning and I go through every new game that's gone up on Steam that day. So we have the data analysis that allows us to filter that, and that's really the point of the discovery team is we're going out and looking for games as much as we're taking inbound pitches. So that's how I found games like Balatro and Abiotic Factor, was just being quick, finding them on Steam as soon as they went up, and reaching out if the games look interesting. If we could have the next slide, please. So we want to use an equal mix of analytics data and gut feeling when assessing projects. So the way I like to kind of describe this is it's 60% heart and 40% head. So that 60% heart comes from fact, as I mentioned, we're all enthusiasts at Playstack and we're looking for specific games, looking for games that speak to us on a level. We're looking for developers and games that we can see ourselves working with for the next, 2 to sometimes 3 years on bringing that project to life. So it's got to speak to us on a fundamental level. Obviously, though, that 40% is the analytics. So that's me doing the business case, the data analysis, the competitive analysis, and basically that's proving that if we were to come in on this project, because if you're working with a publisher, they're always going to be taking something, right? Some sort of revenue share, some sort of recoup phase. So is that going to be worth it? Can we be a 3 times multiplier for this project, kind of bare minimum? So that's very important to us, because obviously if you're just signing games willy-nilly or picking things up without really doing that kind of data portion, you can put both yourself and the developer in a really bad position at the end of the day. So that data analysis is a very important part of the project. And we want to focus on games with a high ceiling potential as well. So while I mentioned that we are genre agnostic, we do look at games that can perform in a genre space. At this point, we have grown as a company. We do have targets to hit internally in terms of revenue. So we are looking for these high ceiling genre spaces. And by high ceiling, I mean games that have the opportunity to kind of grow and pop off. I think the things that people usually point to on Steam specifically are things like multiplayer systems games, deck building roguelikes, like I'm sure terms you've all heard before. And there is a caveat to this. There's always going to be the next Celeste, for example, but at the moment, quite traditional 2D platformers can be quite risky for publishers to kind of go after. It's got to be exceptionally high quality, and I wouldn't necessarily call that a space with a high ceiling potential. Obviously, that might change in the future. So one of the other things you've got to be is agile. You've got to be constantly analyzing the market, understanding what's working, what players want, what they're looking for. And of course, we want to sign the best games we can with passion and efficiency. So I'll talk about this a bit more when I go on to talking about Balatro specifically, but I'll go through kind of the speed of that process and how, the relationship and the conversation and the back and forth is so important at that point. And I didn't mention as well, these games on the right here are just some of our upcoming titles that haven't fully released yet. I'll use some of these as kind of specific case studies when I talk about what publishers are looking for. But yeah, there's some of our upcoming titles. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about what Playstack looks for specifically before kind of I broaden that pool. If we could go to the next slide, please, and one more, please. So yeah, one of the first things we look for on a discovery process, and this is maybe an odd one to mention first, but it's something I want to talk about, is when we're looking at pitches, when we're looking at builds, when we're looking at prototypes, art assets, anything like that, we are looking for visual quality. And what I mean by visual quality isn't mind-blowing 3D graphics. It doesn't have to be the most beautiful game in the world. What we're looking for is cohesion. Cohesion on a visual level. So whether that's 3D or pixel art, does everything kind of make sense within context of the game? Is it appealing? Can it find an audience? A great example maybe from our portfolio is the case of the Golden Idol. I think it's a game that most people would look at and think, wow, that's a pretty ugly game. But the visual cohesion of it is very strong. It's got a very specific art style. It knows what it's going for, and it stands out in the crowd. And that's what I mean, you know, compared to Mortal Shell, for example, which is very different. That's more of a kind of a AA, high quality, high fidelity 3D graphics. So yeah, visual cohesion is very important for us on a scouting level because it's what we see first. And you don't have to have a beautiful vertical slice. It can be a gray box, but if you have a slide, for example, in your pitch deck that shows the visual intention of the game, not using generative AI, might I add, but if it's real art that shows the visual intention of the game, that's good enough for us kind of at that point. So yeah, existing within a viable genre space. So like I mentioned earlier, this is kind of goes hand in hand with the high ceiling genre space. These are genre spaces that you still can see success in that are viable. For example, we're not probably going to publish a traditional sports game, a traditional football or American football game. This is all kind of business analysis where we kind of decide that these genre spaces just aren't really viable, especially when there's kind of so much competition within them. So also bringing something new to the table or excelling in an existing genre space. So this is something I'll get onto when I talk about the way we kind of quickly define games in the discovery process at Playstack. We kind of fit them into 4 categories, which I'll talk about in more detail on the next slide. But obviously, every publisher is looking for something new, something original, something that's going to excite players. Or, you know, again, and this is a caveat, there is a small space for games that are just so exceptional at what they do, even if it has been done before, that they're going to stand out and people are going to want to play them. And very important also, a dev or developers who are easy to work with. So relationship is so important between publisher and developer when you're building a project together. I don't want to say it's 50%, but really it kind of is 50% of the battle when you're making a game. If you have a fantastic partnership between developer and publisher where you can talk to each other, you can be transparent, you can give feedback, and you can work together to make the project as best as it can possibly be. Like I said, without the publisher necessarily having creative control over the project, but listening to each other, listening to each other's advice, that's so important for building a fantastic project. And you know, the games that have a great relationship behind them are usually great at the end of the day themselves. Okay, so this is what I was talking about when we kind of have we kind of drop games into buckets when we're looking at them through the discovery process. So I'll try and explain these one by one. They're a little bit kind of nebulous, but hopefully you get the idea behind them. The games that we're kind of looking for are originators or additive games. So just to break those down a little bit further, originators are games that are, like I said, completely original. They're doing something completely new within a space. It might be something you've never seen before, or a mix of genres you've never seen before. So I'll get on and talk about a case study about that a little bit later, but yeah, just something completely new. And now the only caveat with originators is it can go in the opposite direction as well. You can maybe be a little bit too original. There are games that may be so strange and so out there that they won't kind of find a general audience. They'll be kind of forever, set in their niche. But if kind of the perfect storm is an original game that also has kind of broad appeal, which is a very, very kind of tight balance to hit. But those are the games that really kind of explode. Most of the games we look at and most of the games we consider, we kind of place into this additive bracket. So these are games with recognizable core systems that are just adding to that formula and doing something a little bit new and bringing them to a new audience. So, I mean, a lot of the games we've seen recently that have taken maybe Balatro mechanics or parlor-like mechanics like Clover Pit, those are additive in the space. So you're taking those kind of general concepts from games like Balatro or deck building roguelites, but maybe you're adding a slot machine or something completely new that's adding something new to the experience. So we consider those additive games. So when I'm scouting for games at Playstack, I am looking for originators or additives. And now the kind of games that we're not looking for, so I think it probably speaks for itself at this point, but we're not looking for iterative projects, and a lot of publishers aren't. Iterative projects being, we've seen it before, right? We know the mechanics, we know the way it works, and maybe it's got a new coat of paint aesthetically, but usually that's not enough. If players have experienced that before, it's going to have a harder time standing out in the market. And now probably the oddest little one in here is first cousin iterative. I'll just talk about that very quickly. From a publishing perspective, there is space for iterative games to succeed, but it has to happen very quickly after the original game in that space has launched. So if you think about Vampire Survivors, for example, that was a huge original game in that space. Obviously, it was playing off of other genre spaces, but it was an originator. And some of those Vampire Survivors clones or games that were very close to it mechanically that came out soon afterwards did see some tail-end success. Players love Vampire Survivors. They wanted more quickly. So those first cousin iteratives can succeed. From a publishing perspective, however, we don't usually look at games in that space just because you have to have quite a quick turnaround. They usually have to come out 6 to 12 months after the original game has launched. So yeah, not really looking for games in those two spaces, but definitely looking for originators and additive games. So just to give an example of an originator, or at least something that we think is an originator that we've signed recently at Playstack. So we signed a game called About Fishing. It is a creepy narrative fishing game, and it's from the developer of Arctic Eggs, which, if anyone has played, is quite a surreal experience. You're kind of flipping physics objects in a pan, and it's got this really interesting narrative behind it. So About Fishing is Twin Peaks meets Sega Bass Fishing, which is a really original concept, we thought internally at Playstack. We don't think we've seen a game like this before. There are lots of horror fishing games, but there's not really many cerebral, surreal horror fishing games. So this is Twin Peaks, this is Shenmue, this is Deadly Premonition. This is such a weird mix of titles that we've never seen before, something we thought was truly original. And it's got that low poly PlayStation 1 aesthetic as well, which obviously is very appealing to players at the moment. Do wonder if that will cycle out at some point, but I think it's still quite a strong visual style at the moment. So like I said, this was signed on the basis of being an originator both stylistically and mechanically. The caveat with About Fishing is the forecast for this game is very conservative because, when we sign games at Playstack, we don't think this is going to be a 1 million unit seller and it's going to make a ton of money, but it is an original game that we think should exist within the market, and we want to support the developer in realizing that vision and making this game happen. So this isn't an originator, we think, in the same way that maybe we could consider Balatro an originator, which is an original mechanical concept that's also got kind of broad mainstream appeal. This is very much more on the niche side of originator, but I think it deserves to exist. So this, talk quickly about Abartic Factor. So this was a game that we signed with the idea that it would be additive, and now it kind of sits between that additive and originator space. So Abartic Factor is a survival crafter set in Crumbling Science Facility. It's got a kind of a 90s gold source aesthetic. It looks a lot like the original Half-Life. So this is the gameplay loop of Valheim, like I mentioned, with the aesthetic of Half-Life and the level design of Dark Souls. So what made this additive in the survival crafter space to us was it's not a survival crafting game where you hit a tree with an axe to collect wood. You're doing very different things with this game. You're fighting robots, you're kind of using office supplies to build weapons, to build technology to help you kind of overcome the obstacles in front of you. And unlike most survival crafting games, it's not open world. It's not open world, it's linear. It's got kind of this looping Dark Souls-based level design where you're unlocking areas and you're traveling back to previous parts of the facility, which I think is quite a rarity in that space. It's not something you often see in survival crafting. So the success of this game, I think, speaks to the fact that this is an additive game in the survival crafting space. It brought something new to the table and players really appreciated that. It's gone on to sell 2 million plus copies across PC and console. So this was signed with the expectation of being additive, but it's almost been kind of the perfect storm a little bit where all those elements have come together. And now we almost consider this an originator. Seeing the success of those additive elements, it's almost kind of birthed its own little sub-genre space of, kind of, I guess, more grounded survival crafting games. We're seeing a lot of games that maybe are taking inspiration from Abartic Factor, starting development or starting to come out at this point. So that's been really exciting for us. It's nice to see a game move between those two kind of systems. And this is the last one I'll talk about on kind of the Playstack side of things. So this game launched 2 days ago. So we launched a game called Recoin. This is a coin pusher roguelike. So this is recontextualizing the mechanical loops of Balatro. So we signed this game with the fear that it might end up becoming an iterative, but we wanted to work with the developers to make sure that it was additive in this space. So the things that make Recoin different to something like Balatro, even though it's got a lot of the same kind of flourishes, it's got the same idea of multipliers, using items to increase your multipliers, it is lower skill ceiling. So it's got a higher dependency on RNG, it's got bigger numbers and more exciting visuals. So it's taking those loops from Balatro, but it's adding something a little bit different to it. It almost verges on becoming a roguelike idler as much as a roguelike deck builder because of the physics of the coins and the physicality of them. It's definitely something a little bit different. And like I mentioned, we signed this with the expectation that this could end up becoming an iterative title. So it was very clear to us that we had to work with the developers to ensure that this became additive in the genre space. Very happy to say that that seems like it has been successful for us. I can say that we've sold 200,000 copies in about 48 hours, so players are responding well to it. So yeah, hopefully we can consider this another additive game in our portfolio. So I'm just going to talk a little bit now about what publishers want, kind of on a very kind of, I guess, ground level basis. If you're going to pitch to publishers and you're going to talk to them, this is kind of the things that I guess we'll expect to see at an early level. I do want to caveat this as well, that this is from my perspective at Playstack. There might be some publishers that disagree or have different methods, but I'd like to kind of share this information anyway. So we are looking for a pitch deck. I think that's probably quite clear. I'm sure everybody in the audience knows that. When you are pitching to a publisher, it's a good idea to have a pitch deck and basically what the pitch deck contains in it. Personally, I'm more than happy to see pitch decks that are only between, say, 6 and 8 slides. I want to know what the game is, I want to know what it looks like or the intention of what it might look like, when it releases, and what you guys need. You know, how much dev funding does it need? What obviously we talk about marketing support and QA and localization, all of that, but you know, spell that out in your pitch deck. Tell us exactly what you need from a publisher. I do have the brackets there that says sometimes, because basically what's more important is some sort of early playable. So when I'm talking about this, I'm not necessarily talking about a very, you know, lavish vertical slice. It can be gray box, just something that shows the early mechanical intention of the game, some sort of loop, something we can get our hands on and get an idea of what the game might end up feeling like. In my opinion, that is more important than the pitch deck, because a lot of that information can be hashed out during meetings. You can chat with each other, you can discuss what the game needs. Basically, that's what happened with Balatro. Local Thunk didn't come to us with a pitch deck. I reached out to him and talked to him, played the game. Pitch deck wasn't involved in the process at any point, essentially. But the playable was really important. Playing that, getting a feel for it. And like I said, it can be early, it can be grey box. Don't think you have to cram everything in there just to get an idea of the mechanical intention of the game. And of course, we're looking at a due diligence process as well. This is really important. I think if you are talking to publishers and they try and ignore this step, that is something you should look out for. It is an amber to red flag at that point. And basically, due diligence is, I am involved in that process, but that's usually where I bring in other members of the team, our COO, Kevin, for example, and he will go through kind of, I guess, the more complex questions. He'll talk about tech stack, he'll talk about intention, you know, safety of the build, where you're storing it, release window, dev funding, does all that stuff make sense? Have you got yourself covered in all the areas? So you definitely want to do that. And obviously the due diligence stage with any publisher is a great chance to ask them questions as well. Make sure you know everything about them. Make sure they're being clear and transparent with what they're offering you. And of course, we expect a negotiation period as well. So what most publishers should do is they should send you a term sheet in advance of sending you a full contract. And that term sheet should show you the intention of the deal. And that's your point to, you know, argue back, to look at it, say, that doesn't make sense, not sure about that, can you explain that in more detail? And that should be a really key part of the negotiation period. You should be talking through it, you should be asking questions, you should be pushing back on things that you don't like or things that you don't think should be part of the contract. And of course, you can do that with a long form contract as well, but it's much easier to do it with an early term sheet than it is to do it with a 50, 60 page contract. So make sure you get in early and ask those questions and kind of try and sort things out. On the other hand, I want to talk a little bit about what publishers maybe necessarily don't expect at an early stage, or at least, again, from Playstack's perspective, what we don't expect. So we don't expect a preset number of wish lists. I think, and I'll talk about this a bit more when I use Balatro as the main case study, but I think maybe old school thought was if the game had more wish lists, obviously the more successful it was going to be, the more it's speaking to an audience. We don't necessarily believe that anymore. You know, wish lists are important. They can be a great metric, you know, to show the popularity of your game. But the whole point of working with a publisher is to grow wish lists. If, you know, they can see the intention and the excitement behind the game, and they can help you grow those wish list numbers. That's what they're there for. So the amount of wish lists, to me at least, don't really matter. Golden Idol, for example, is a game that's gone on to do very well. It launched with only about 7,000 to 8,000 wish lists. Very, very kind of low numbers. It didn't really make it over kind of what people consider now the basic threshold for success. So wish lists are things that we don't expect to see. We also don't expect to see a fully built store presence either. So I know I've chatted with some developers before and they've asked, well, I have a Steam page up already. Is that okay? I don't have a Steam page up already. Is that okay? Totally fine. We don't expect you to have, a full presentation for your game at that point on storefronts. Obviously, that's the publisher's job to come in and help you build that. Doesn't matter if you have it there already either. The game will kind of speak for itself at that point. A game that's already 90% finished. Like I mentioned, we're okay to look at early gray box builds, and we're there to help. We're there to help with the process of developing the game. Maybe not on a creative level, but we are there to give feedback. I know there is kind of an attitude today that some publishers will, only look at a game if it's basically ready to launch, right? Come in at the last second where it's been completely de-risked and they'll just throw it out on the storefront. Obviously, we don't do that. I think a lot of publishers don't do that. We are happy to look at a game at a very early stage and help kind of build it all throughout development. We've done that with a few games. Recoin, for example, was very early when we looked at it. PAX, which is a game that we have coming out in early access this year, when we looked at that game, it was a proof of concept. It wasn't even an early prototype at that point. So we are happy to get on early and help the game through to launch if we can, see the potential in it. And like I mentioned earlier, I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, we're not looking to sign projects that will do just as well without publishing support. The whole point of the publisher is to be a force multiplier. I have looked at great games before that I personally love. Plenty of amazing RPG maker games with fantastic stories, fantastic narratives. That is a space, at least in my opinion, that publisher support isn't going to make a whole world of difference. Those are games that will hit their audience regardless if they have a publisher or not. So it's not our job at that point to go in, take a cut of that from the developer just to, maybe get it to 1.5 times the audience instead of 3 to 4 times the audience. So yeah, those are things that we don't expect kind of at this stage talking to developers. So after going through all of that, hopefully I've still got enough time to cover Balatro before we kind of move to a Q&A section. But basically I'm going to take all that information now, everything I've just talked about, and talk about how we kind of put that into practice, signing Balatro specifically, what the process looked like, what kind of the early communication looked like. You'll see some direct messages between myself and Local Thunk. Hopefully you can kind of read them from this distance, and basically just what everything looked like leading up to actually signing the project. That's Balatro. It's a video game. That's all there is to it. Next slide, please. So Balatro is a hyperkinetic poker roguelike deck builder created by the Canadian solo dev Local Thunk. So I think people love this game because of its rich mechanical depth, its replayability, but also in tandem with that, it's got a really unique, juicy art style. It's got a lot of kind of it's got a lot of feedback to it when you play the game. It kind of works on a lot of different fronts. It's also got this kind of almost slightly creepy aesthetic to it, like you're playing video poker in like a haunted casino. All these things kind of come together to, I think, create a game that people really responded to and really enjoyed. So what was finding Balatro like? So this is quite an interesting process. So like I mentioned at the beginning, the things that we do at Playstack is look at every new game that goes up on Steam every day. So I saw Balatro the day it went up on Steam, May 24th, 2023, and it had 4 followers. So it really was not getting much attention from day one. And it's interesting to think about this in retrospect because especially at the time, the discovery process was quite based around the idea of wish lists. So Balatro was actually quite low down on my list that day to actually reach out to and actually contact because the followers and wish lists weren't necessarily immediately saying that this was going to be a really exciting game that spoke to people. So as you can see there, I've got kind of the SteamDB data from a little bit later. But you can see that little flat line at the beginning for the first couple of weeks. It wasn't really picking up much natural attention within the algorithm. And then you can see, basically, as soon as the demo starts to go live, influencers start to play it, you see it start to uptick slowly. That little bar is a little bit out of whack because that little jump at the beginning right there just after July 23 was actually massive, but it just got even bigger after launch. So it did rocket quite quickly. But interesting to note, in the early days, it wasn't a primary game for me to reach out to that day. Luckily, in retrospect, I had quite a slow day. I got down to the bottom of my list, and Balatro was one of the games I had listed to contact based on an initial analysis of the Steam page. So my initial communication with Local Thunk was actually through Twitter at the time, or I guess X. When I reached out to him, he had 0 followers and 0 following. He had just created the account to go up with the game at the time. So as you can see, my kind of initial reach out to Local Thunk was, I guess, the way we do things at Playstack. Nothing is templated. I don't send out template emails or messages to developers. I always talk a little bit about what makes their game special or what makes their game special to us. So, I talked about, the wealth of unlockables, the abilities, the pixel art, all seemed really appealing. I'd love to know more about the game. Can I play it? Can you send me over the Steam demo, which he did. And yeah, pretty much almost immediately that day, he got back to me, said Steam's the best way to try it out. Still hammering out the bugs, pretty representative of what he envisioned the end game of the end state of the game to be, and he'll send me an email. So I, said I was finishing my day at that point. I think you see it as 5:23. I was finishing in 7 minutes. So I said, yeah, I'll get back to you tomorrow after I've checked out the game, checked out the email. So this is the follow-up email I received from Local Thunk the same day, which I got to check the next day when I jumped into the office. Just really interesting kind of look at this, especially retrospectively. We can kind of figure out some things in this early process. He's talking about thank you for the interest, of course. He's proud of what he's created even at this point. And the thing that I always point back to on this is he wasn't sure if a publisher would be beneficial to him. And that was very key at this early point in the relationship because, of course, my job isn't to push people into a publishing deal when they don't want to. So I was extremely cognizant of that. So I wanted to be very transparent, as we always are, and just talk to Local Thunk about what we could potentially offer him as a publisher and see if that fit with what he was looking for. It's interesting to note that immediately he talks about he had some difficulty in marketing the game, which is something that's still a little bit true today. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And he talks about how he doesn't enjoy marketing. He thinks if the game is accessible and fun, it's got a good chance for long-tail success on Steam. But he says he could be wrong. He's never released a game before, so this is all new to him. So again, that was very key to us as well. Understand that working with a first-time developer in particular, you are there to be a partner and to guide them through that process. So this is the response I sent June 7th. Again, like I said, I very transparently talked about what Playstack could potentially offer at this point. I talked about our general kind of services, PR, QA, localization, marketing, things that you'll expect from publishing in general. The thing is, though, I wanted to talk particularly about marketing in this case, because obviously that was something he was particularly concerned about. So I just kind of went through what we could potentially do with that. I talked about using Steam Next Fest, kind of basic publishing knowledge at that point, things that could help, really help the game sing. And one of the things I really like to talk about was our internal trailer team, because I think that was quite important to him at that point. Being unsure of how to market the game, I wanted to talk to him about games like Case of the Golden Idol or Axolotl, which had trailers that were created internally at Playstack, and how those kind of raised those games up in the algorithm. And it was interesting to think about at this point as well, because we really only had a few games under our belt at this point. The pre-Balatro days, we were really known for Mortal Shell and Golden Idol, and that was about it. So yeah, I had to kind of use those games as leverage to show Local Thunk what we could do for him. So this is really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about our initial feedback, and this is where I alluded to earlier in the talk about publishers being wrong. So publishers are wrong quite a lot, especially when it comes to development feedback. Obviously they can be right and they can give good advice sometimes, but Local Thunk had a very clear vision for the game. But I want to talk about some of the feedback that we had internally initially, just to kind of show what the whole process looked like. So this is the feedback that I sent to Local Thunk directly. So as you can see, it's very positive. I talked about, the amazing amount of Joker cards, the unique hook, the difficulty curve, stellar mechanics, all the things that exist in the game at that point. But you got some slightly weird feedback in there as well. I'm talking about more fleshed out modes, campaign mode, time attack, things that we thought about in kind of the early days. Again, in retrospect, I don't think that's the best feedback in the world. I think it's wrong. I think the joy of Balatro is actually how clean it is, how replayable it is, how it's not kind of fettered with extra modes. It's very easy to pick up and play, and it's very clean in kind of all those ways. But interesting to note some of the things we were thinking about early on. If we can move to the next slide, please. So here I'm talking about, I'm telling the rest of the team about this game. So I'm posting the internal Slack, and I said, hey team, passing through 2 new builds, Balatro, card-based poker roguelite, access via Steam, potential to be a small-scale 2023 release. So that was the thinking at the time. not many wish lists. The game was seeing attention, but it's a small game. It's probably going to have a low price point. It's probably going to be quite difficult to market. So yeah, it's something that we should definitely consider, but we should set our expectations for it at this point. So yeah, I showed the feedback that I sent directly to Local Thunk, but obviously we have our internal feedback as well that is eventually shared with Local Thunk. But when we're talking about the game internally, we're kind of sharing this between ourselves. And again, this is the kind of slightly wrong, slightly bad, slightly stupid feedback that I'm talking about. Like I said, I thought the game would likely have a low RRP at that point. One of the problems with discovering, one of the problems with scouting is you only have so much time to actually play a game. So when I'm playing Balatro, I can play it for a couple of hours, maybe maximum, and get the feel for it. I have no idea if this game can continue to be played for hundreds and hundreds of hours. I have to I have to base that off just the feel of it at the time. I did think this would be a low RRP game. Originally we were thinking $10 or less. That was the scale of the game at that point. Extremely difficult, I imagine, to market, which is one of the things I mentioned is quite true. It's a game that sings when players get their hands on it, but it's a very kind of esoteric game to actually show people on a marketing level. Here's a bunch of floating cards. How does that work? What's the hook here? So that was one of the things that we were thinking quite strongly about. And one of the most important things is he was planning to release the game that next month. So he was literally planning to throw out in 30 days with the level of content it had, which was good. It was a great level of content even at that point. But one of the things we were quite concerned about is, well, we can't make a difference within that time frame as a publisher. So we talked to Local Thunk, and we luckily extended the amount of time he worked on the game by about 6 to 8 months so he could make the game that he really wanted to make, and we could fully support it with the marketing campaign. And at the time, I thought the Steam page was bad. I didn't think the GIFs spoke to the game. I didn't think the description was very good, the short description or the long description. So that was something that was affecting its visibility at the beginning. So yeah, some of this is wrong. Some of it is right. It's always a mixed bag. You should be taking this kind of feedback, not with a grain of salt, but with the understanding that you should be true to your vision and take feedback where it matters, which is a difficult thing to do, but something you should kind of stay true to during the development process. So yeah, the contract was signed in July 2023, so it was done in about 2 weeks, 2 weeks to 3 weeks. Very, very stressful because as we were going through the process, Local Thunk had to set up his own company so we could actually sign the contract. And during that period, people like Northern Lion started playing the game and it was starting to explode on YouTube. And obviously we knew we had something special at that point, but obviously he was getting a lot of offers from a lot of interested parties. Very, very, very grateful that he chose to put his trust in us and continue to work with us, because some of the offers were absolutely ridiculous, and I don't know if I would have been tempted myself to take some of them. So yeah, not at all stressful, 1 month turnaround. And yeah, if you go to Local Thunk's website, you can actually read his blog, and he will take you through the process from kind of inception of the game all the way up to signing beyond. It's really worth reading that to get his perspective on it, because obviously you're hearing mine right now, but it's really interesting to kind of go through this. He talks about setting up a business, deciding to play with Playstack after speaking with studios that have worked with them in the past, which is really important for us. Like I mentioned, continue to work with the same devs, building those great relationships that end up publishing great games. So this is the forecast for Balatro, and this is a little bit truncated because I can't share too much about it. But basically what you have on the left here is the predicted wish lists for Balatro. So one of the things that we do at Playstack while we're forecasting a game is we try and understand a predicted wish list, and we try and convert those wish lists to sales. We believe that every genre space, if it hits a certain quality target, has a wish list conversion rate. So a really great deck building roguelite, every wish list might be worth something ridiculous like 8 unit sales. Whereas if you have something like a more of a generic survival crafter, every wish list might be worth 0.3 to 0.4 unit sales. Again, this is all, it's a little bit kind of smoke and mirrors, pseudoscience, but it is helpful in those early stages to get an idea of how much the game could make upon launch. And so, at the time, I thought this was very kind of bullshit of us internally, but I predicted every wish list would be worth 1 unit sale, which is a very, very high conversion rate. I think initially when I did the forecast, it was all the way up to 8. We thought an exceptional deck building roguelike could do that, but we like to be conservative. That's very important because conservatism protects everyone in the process. If you are conservative, we want to forecast at a medium estimation, that if we hit that medium estimation, we're happy and the dev's even happier. That's the most important thing during this process. So yeah, quite a bolshy one. You see we've kind of done a low to high sales forecast there, going from top to bottom. So at the absolute lowest, we thought this game might do 40,000 units, and this is within a year. So this is year one sales estimations. 40,000 units within a year at a low expectation, towards a medium-high expectation of 130,000 units plus. So again, quite conservative, but if we hit those sales targets, everyone's really happy. That's what we should be aiming for, so that's what we did aim for. So yeah, apologies for the slightly strange graph, but this is kind of covering off what I do when it comes to kind of the financial analysis and the competitor analysis. I am making a list of other deck building roguelikes. I am trying to get an idea of what their unit sales are. I'm trying to plot where Balatro will end up versus those unit sales. So again, we've got going from low to high, the estimated sales there, and basically just plotting where they're coming across. So even at that point, it's quite, we're putting a lot of faith in the game, basically. If we're hitting medium to high, we are still one of the most successful deck building roguelikes in that space within a year. So again, it's a lot going on there. You see we're around about kind of Peglin at the highest estimation there within year one unit sales, and that's what we're kind of aiming for internally at Playstack. If we can move to the next slide, please. And then we had the reality. Very fortunately, Balatro ended up being much more successful than we initially predicted. Obviously, I'm very happy that we, forecast the game conservatively because it protected everyone. But obviously, this was the best case scenario. We went above ceiling estimation. We ended up selling, I think it's probably closer to 7 million units plus now across PC, console, and mobile. We're still overwhelmingly positive on Steam. That was amazing, and obviously internally grateful for that happening. But I guess the whole point of this isn't to kind of show off and say, look how great this game has done. It's to show the fact that we didn't expect this, and we didn't want to expect it in a way. We were wrong about the forecast, but that ended up being a good thing. Publishers being wrong in the right way is kind of one of the points of this conversation. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of the point of this presentation. Hopefully the first half of it was interesting for any developers in the audience who might be looking to pitch their games or things to expect when talking to publishers. The forecasting for myself is, the conclusion for myself is that forecasting is really hard. It's still really hard today, especially as expectations have risen for Playstack. Do we forecast more aggressively? We don't. We're still conservative. We're still very careful about the way we forecast games because, again, we want to protect ourselves, but more importantly, we want to protect the developers that we're working with. They're in a much more vulnerable position than we are. We are a company. We have a salary. Developers, this is kind of their whole life when they move to make a project. Quality, of course, is key. Balatro has been successful, Recoin has been successful. We're hoping our next games will be successful because they are qualitative projects. That should speak for itself, but obviously that's one of the main things that we're also looking for during the discovery process. Like I said, publishers are often wrong, better if we're wrong in the right way. Very important. And finally, now this is kind of an older slide, so this isn't really kind of key anymore, but when I was first giving a variation of this talk, lots of people were talking about, we want to sign the next Balatro, we want to find the next Balatro, we want to make the next Balatro. The next Balatro isn't going to be anything like Balatro, and that's already been proven. If we think about what was, games that were the next Balatro, they were in completely different genre spaces with completely different art styles in completely original ways. Think about Peak or Expedition, all of these games. Blueprints is a fantastic example, right? These are games that are so highly original and nothing like Balatro. So the next Balatro will be something completely different, as has been proven multiple times over the past few years, as will continue to be true as time goes on. Yeah, I'd say that's really about it. I hope that was interesting for everybody and it kind of covered off a few things. Hopefully it was interesting to see kind of the story of Balatro. Hopefully it was interesting to learn about what publishers might be looking for in a relationship. Obviously, I think we hopefully have time for Q&A. If anyone has any questions in the audience, I'd be more than happy to talk about them. I also have my email up there, though, so if I don't manage to answer any questions or you have to run for whatever reason, please feel free to email me and reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about anything. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Indie Jam for having me as well.
I swear that Balatro Clown is staring straight into my soul.
It's awful.
Yeah, it's awful.
I hate him. He's terrible.
But again, thank you, Patrick, for giving us that insight as to how publishers look for games and what they're looking for in a pitch before publishing a game or signing for one. Of course, we do have time for Q&A, so if anyone would like to ask any questions, please raise your hands.
Oh, hello.
Hi,
Patrick.
How's it going?
Yeah, it's going great. So you mentioned this high ceiling genre spaces in your slide just
Yes.
now. So I was actually wondering how do you define a high ceiling genre space, and what are some high ceiling genres that you yourself feel are in the market right now?
Yeah, excellent. That's a really good question, and yeah, definitely a difficult one because it is quite nebulous, right, as to what is a high ceiling genre space. I think traditionally, when you're looking at Steam and PC specifically, a high ceiling genre space is something that continues to see success, even if there are more and more games coming out in that space. So I know again it covers quite a lot of different spaces, but roguelike, for example, high replayability games that you can play for hundreds and hundreds of hours, we consider that a high ceiling space, as we would consider something like a survival crafter. I guess games that we consider maybe not so high ceiling anymore, or games that we're a little bit more nervous of, I guess more traditional arcade experiences that may be considered old-fashioned by a general player base. So shmups, racing games, kind of very traditional arcadey 2D platformers. Again, caveat is saying these games won't succeed. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but we don't consider those games necessarily to be in high ceiling genre spaces. And obviously the market will continue to shift and things will continue to change. I mentioned Expedition. That's a great example of a genre space that maybe wasn't traditionally considered high ceiling, turn-based JRPG. It had its niche, but obviously that game proved that genre space has a hungry audience that maybe is being underserved. So that has probably rocketed from a low ceiling genre space into a high one through that game alone. So it does change all the time, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better idea of kind of what we're looking for at the moment.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? All right.
Hello, Patrick. Thank
Hi.
you for the presentation.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm interested in understanding the mindset that you guys had when signing Mortal Shell 2. I tried the first one and I think it was an interesting game. Had some rough edges.
Yes, for sure.
But as a publisher, when you guys look at a first IP like that and then think of a sequel, like what would motivate you to come back if the first one didn't go so well?
Yes.
What convinced you?
No, I think that's a really good question and something we thought a lot about internally before signing that project. So Mortal Shell is an interesting case, right? Because I think Mortal Shell initially did well because it was one of the first indie Souls-likes in that space to capture a little bit of that FromSoft magic. I think on a visual level, Mortal Shell does capture what players are interested in about the FromSoft experience. Obviously, the danger in that genre space now is we've come a long way. Your competition is now Lies of P, right? These absolutely amazing Souls-likes. So when we signed Mortal Shell 2, it was with the intention that we knew we were going into a difficult genre space, but we were working with developers that we had a great working relationship with for the first game, and now they are working on a second game. They've got the skill set that they applied to the first game, but it's bigger, better, more visually sumptuous, more going on. And I will agree with you. I think it's quite a high-risk project. There are many things that could go wrong as there are things that could go right. I think the response to it has been very good so far, and will continue to be so. We're kind of ramping things up now for this year in particular. We're hoping to launch this year. But yeah, I think we signed the project based on faith in the development team, faith on the working relationship that, we ironed out all the kinks working on Mortal Shell 1, so to speak. And I think after the financial projections and the competitor analysis, we thought we could exist within this space. I think the standout thing about Mortal Shell 2, hopefully, is that it is Souls-like, but it's also a little more kind of action-forward. People have described it as a little bit like Doom Eternal meets Dark Souls. It's a little bit heavy metal, right? It's got that aspect to it. We used a particular song for the trailer as well to kind of get that point across. So yeah, it's a good question, but like I said, I think it was really based on previous relationship. I do wonder if we would have signed that game if we didn't have a great previous relationship with the developers. It certainly would have been a much tougher process. So yeah, sorry, hopefully that answers your question.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
Oh, thank you
so
for
my name is
coming.
Danny, and I have one question lah. As a publisher, what is your biggest fear and challenging during works Balatro?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So the initial fear was definitely that somebody else would sign the game before we did. That was very nerve-wracking. I guess the fear going forward with Balatro was it had a lot of quite interesting problems, before launch and after launch. One of the big things was the age ratings debacle. I'm not sure how many people in the audience know about that, but obviously the game is not a gambling game. It has a poker aesthetic and a poker theme, but the age rating boards are really difficult to deal with. So for example, in the UK, Balatro is rated as an 18 plus. So that was very challenging, and we knew that might be a problem before launch, and obviously it did become a problem post-launch. So that was one of the biggest challenges. In terms of actually signing the game, I would like to say that Balatro was one of the rare examples where everyone on the team was quite unified behind the project, and we didn't have many fears about the game's success. Obviously, like I said, we forecast conservatively, but we were quite confident in the game. One of the things, I guess, that was interesting to think about was Local Thunk is obviously a solo developer. So I think workload, stress on him, protecting him as a developer, protecting his anonymity as a developer as well. Those were all quite big concerns for us. So those were definitely things we thought about. I guess we were lucky with Balatro in that all of the problems, all the things that we faced were all outside of the game itself, so to speak. I mean, maybe just to give you an example, Abiotic Factor was actually a little bit more difficult to sign, only because the game only had a few internal champions at Playstack. Like, people liked the game, but only a few people really loved the game and understood it. So that made the process a little bit more difficult because it's a little bit more convincing to do during the green light. But yeah, sorry, hopefully that answered your question.
All right, thank you, Patrick.
No problem, my pleasure.
Hi, great talk.
Thanks.
I have two questions if we have time, but the first one I wanted to ask was, is there anything a developer should do besides having the playable build? Like, do publishers check their social media accounts, making sure they're good and all that? Like, what else should they do in preparation for pitching to a publisher?
Yes, that's a great question. And yeah, definitely what you mentioned at first definitely comes into the due diligence process as well. We do check social media for, devs that are good to work with, essentially. I know people like Raw Fury joke about having a secret Nazi clause where they not work with you if you espouse radicalized views, right? Or you're hateful in any way. We definitely do that. We've definitely not worked on games before because we have looked up developers and we've seen the kind of things that they post online. Don't think it's appropriate for a working relationship, so we have said no to that project. In terms of other things that developers should be preparing for when talking to a publisher, I think just having a clear idea, having all the information easily readable and available to the publisher at that point. So like I mentioned before, release timelines, accurate idea of dev funding. And in that dev funding, please include things like contingency as well. Don't pay yourself the bare minimum, pay yourself a comfortable wage to make the game that you want to make. Just having all that information kind of immediately available. We are quite casual, so I'm happy to speak to people on a very kind of normal, casual level. And so I don't expect a ton of preparation. I don't expect a really great kind of performance and show when you're pitching their game. More than happy to just talk about what the game actually is, ask questions, make it a casual conversation. Again, that doesn't apply to every publisher, but obviously on the indie publishing scene, I think that is most publishers what they expect at that point. They're not expecting the world; they just want a bit of clarity to understand if they can help you with your game or not.
The second question I had is, I think in this region, everyone sees as getting signed with a publisher is kind of the end game, but maybe not a lot of people know about what actually is the day-to-day of working with a publisher. So can you give some examples of what you do? Do you have weekly meetings with your devs, or is there a producer involved, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to cover that. And yeah, good question. So the process with Playstack is, if you sign with us, we assign a marketing manager and a production lead from our side to work with you on the project. Depending on the stage of development, you will either have weekly or bi-weekly meetings with both of those parties to discuss the progress of the game. We have signed games that are very, very early in development, and at that point we have faith in the developers to work on that kind of, concepting for the game to bring it together, and we're a little bit less involved at that point. Obviously, as we ramp up closer to launch, announcements, Steam pages, that's when the marketing team gets involved, fully. That's when things start to really kick off. But we are there from day one. We usually have a Discord set up where all of our developers are in their separate private Discords within the Playstack Discord, and that's where you can talk to everybody. So you can have access to everyone on the team, you can talk to people daily, and then we have those kind of weekly face-to-face meetings where we can discuss the progress of the game. And yeah, we do work on a milestone basis as well. It is a flexible milestone basis because a lot of people at Playstack are ex-game developers themselves, and they understand the game development changes all the time. So those milestones aren't set in stone, and we are happy to change them. But obviously those are good kind of good places to look at the game, make sure it's going in the right direction, discuss what could change at that point, what development pipelines could change. So yeah, it is quite a close-knit relationship, but like I mentioned at the beginning, we do want to ensure that our developers know that they have full creative control over the project. So yeah, we don't get too involved on that side, but we want them to know that we're obviously there for them in any capacity.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
So based on your personal experience working with the publisher team,
Yes.
How would you describe the process of communication with the developers? Has it consistently been smooth so far, or maybe there's a few hiccups here and there?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things with the relationship is you're always going to have ups and downs at a certain point. I think the most important thing is that you're transparent with each other. You can work through those ups and downs to kind of get to the other side of things. I think we have very good relationships, luckily, with all the developers that we've worked with. But stress does happen. Tensions do get high. Usually, a month before launch or so, everyone's freaking out a little bit. So tensions are high, and the relationship can definitely waver up and down. Lucky enough to have good relationships all throughout. Communication is really important, and to be transparent with you, it's one of the things I struggle with on the discovery side a little bit, because communication was very important for signing games like Balatro and Abaltic Factor. And I always want to be fast. I always want to look at builds and get back to people and not leave them in limbo. But as more games come in, as we're looking at more things and the team stays the same size, it's really hard to get back to everybody sometimes. So that level of communication, I think, could do with improvement on our side at the moment. The blocker is usually me at that point. But when we're actually signed with a developer, I think communication is usually quite strong. Like I said, with those occasional, troughs and peaks. So, thank you.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, that was all the time we had for Q&A. Thank you again, Patrick, for your enlightenment and to a publisher's point of view.